The old pickup truck rattled down Willow Creek Drive, just as the afternoon sun started dipping below the trees. Behind the wheel, a man in his early 30s checked the address on his phone one more time. Number 42. That should be the White House with the blue shutters. Right there on the corner. He'd been running his handyman business for about 6 years now, ever since he'd left his office job to do something with his hands. His grandfather had taught him everything about fixing things when he was just a kid. Those summer afternoons spent in Grandpa's garage learning how to wire a lamp or replace a faucet had turned into a real career. He never imagined back then that he'd be his own boss one day, driving around town helping people fix up their homes. The call had come in that morning. A woman's voice, shaky and urgent, explaining that her porch light had been flickering for days and now it wasn't working at all. She lived alone, she'd said, and it made her nervous having a dark porch at night. Could he come today? She'd be willing to pay extra. He'd told her no need for extra payment. He could fit her in around 3 o'clock. Besides, a porch light was usually a quick job. Probably just loose wiring or a bad fixture. He'd have it sorted in an hour, maybe less. Now here he was, pulling into the driveway of a house that had definitely seen better days. The paint was peeling a bit around the window frames and the garden looked like it hadn't been tended in quite some time. But it was clean, orderly. Someone cared about this place even if they couldn't keep up with all the maintenance anymore. As he grabbed his toolbox from the back of the truck, he noticed the curtain in the front window move. Just a flutter, then stillness. Someone was watching. That happened sometimes, especially with older folks living alone. They wanted to make sure the person showing up was actually the person they'd hired. He walked up the cracked concrete path toward the front door, his work boots heavy on the ground. The porch light fixture dangled slightly, and even in the daylight he could see the problem. The whole mounting bracket looked loose. This was going to need more than just a new bulb. Before he could knock, the door opened about 6 inches. A chain lock held it in place. Through the gap he could see a woman's face. She had to be in her late 70s at least, maybe older. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun and her eyes were sharp, cautious. "Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, keeping his voice friendly and professional. "Yes," she replied, not opening the door any wider. "You're from the handyman service?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm the one you spoke with this morning. About the porch light." He shifted his toolbox to his other hand and reached into his pocket, pulling out his business card and his license. "Here's my information if you'd like to verify." She studied the cards through the gap, then looked at his face, then back at the cards. The silence stretched out. He'd been through this before. Some people just needed a minute to feel comfortable. He didn't take it personally. A woman living alone had every right to be careful. Finally, she unlatched the chain and opened the door wider, though she didn't step back to let him in. "The light's right there," she said, pointing up at the fixture above his head. "It's been making a buzzing sound for about a week. Then 2 nights ago it started flickering. Last night it went out completely. I can definitely take a look at that for you," he said, setting his toolbox down on the porch. "Mind if I set up here?" She nodded but didn't move from the doorway. She was watching him closely, arms crossed over her cardigan. He could feel her eyes on him as he opened his toolbox and pulled out his voltage tester. "I'm going to need to cut the power to this fixture," he explained, looking back at her. "Do you know where your circuit breaker is?" "In the basement," she said. "I can show you." "That's all right, ma'am. If you just point me in the right direction, I can find it. No need for you to go down any stairs." She hesitated, and he could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Let a stranger into her house, into her basement. But what choice did she have? The light needed fixing. "Through the kitchen," she finally said, stepping back and opening the door wider. "There's a door on the left. The stairs are steep. Thank you, ma'am. I'll be careful." Inside, the house smelled like lavender and old books. The furniture was dated but immaculate. Everything had its place. Framed photographs lined the mantel over the fireplace, though he didn't stop to look at them closely. He found the basement door exactly where she'd said. The stairs creaked under his weight as he descended into the cool darkness. He pulled the string on the overhead bulb and found the circuit breaker box on the far wall. It was old, probably original to the house. He found the breaker labeled front porch and flipped it off. Back upstairs, Mrs. Hayes had moved to stand near the doorway, giving him space to work but still keeping him in her line of sight. He climbed back out onto the porch and tested the fixture with his voltage tester. No power, good. All right, he said, more to himself than to her. Let's see what we've got here. He pulled out his screwdriver and started removing the fixture cover. The screws were rusted, and he had to work carefully not to strip them. As he worked, he could feel Mrs. Hayes watching him from the doorway. The silence was heavy, awkward. How long have you lived here? He asked, trying to break the tension. 43 years, she replied. Her voice was stiff, formal. My husband and I bought this house in 1982. That's a long time, he said, getting the last screw loose. Must have seen a lot of changes in the neighborhood. Yes, she said simply. The fixture cover came off, and he could immediately see the problem. The wiring inside was ancient, cloth-covered stuff that was crumbling apart. Whoever had installed this originally, or maybe whoever had worked on it last, hadn't done a great job. The connections were loose, and one of the wires had actually burned through its insulation. Ma'am, I found your problem, he said, glancing back at her. The wiring in here is pretty old. It's not just the fixture that needs replacing. I'm going to need to redo these connections and probably replace about a foot of wire. It's a fire hazard the way it is now. Her face went pale. A fire hazard? Yes, ma'am. But don't worry, I can fix it today. I've got everything I need in my truck. It'll take me a bit longer than I initially thought. Maybe an hour and a half instead of an hour, and the cost will be a little more because of the extra materials and time. Is that all right? She nodded quickly. Yes, of course. Just fix it safely. He walked back to his truck to get fresh wire and a new fixture. When he returned to the porch, she was still standing in the doorway, but something in her posture had changed slightly. Maybe it was because he'd been honest about the problem, or because he'd asked permission before doing extra work. Whatever it was, she seemed just a tiny bit less tense. He got to work, carefully stripping away the old wiring and running new lines. It was detailed work, and he concentrated on doing it right. Grandpa had always said that if you're going to do something, do it properly. No shortcuts, no sloppy work. People's safety depended on it. As he twisted the wires together and secured them with wire nuts, he became aware that Mrs. Hayes had taken a small step out onto the porch. She was watching his hands as he worked. You know what you're doing, she said. It wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. He smiled without looking up from his work. My grandfather was an electrician. He taught me young. Always said that good wiring was like good manners. You don't see it on the surface, but it's what holds everything together safely. For the first time since he'd arrived, he heard something that might have been a small laugh. It was brief, barely there, but it was something. That's a wise way to look at it, she said. The ice, just barely, was starting to thaw. 20 minutes into the repair work, something shifted in the air on that front porch. He couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but Mrs. Hayes had gradually moved from standing rigid in the doorway to sitting in the wicker chair near the porch rail. She was still watching him, but now it seemed more like curiosity than suspicion. He was threading the new wire through the mounting bracket when she spoke again. How long have you been doing this kind of work? About 6 years as my own business hand, he replied, carefully feeding the wire through. Before that, I worked in an office. Sat at a desk all day, staring at a computer screen. Nearly drove me crazy. What made you change? He paused, considering how to answer. My grandfather got sick. He'd been running his own repair business for 40 years, and suddenly he couldn't work anymore. I took some time off to help him finish his last few jobs, and somewhere in the middle of all that, I remembered why I'd loved working with him as a kid. When he passed, I just couldn't go back to that desk. Life's too short to spend it doing something that doesn't feel right. Mrs. Hayes was quiet for a moment. That's very mature of you, she said softly. Most young people these days want the easy office job, the steady paycheck. Oh, I definitely miss that steady paycheck sometimes, he laughed. Especially when the truck needs new tires or business is slow in winter. But I sleep better at night knowing I'm doing something real, something that helps people. Do you have family? A wife, children? Getting married next spring, he said, allowing himself a smile. My fiancé thinks I'm crazy for giving up a desk job, but she supports me. No kids yet, but someday. That's wonderful, Mrs. Hayes said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice now. Marriage is a good thing when you find the right person. A partnership. That's what it should be. He secured the mounting bracket and started connecting the new fixture. The afternoon sun was slanting across the porch now, warm and golden. A neighbor walked by with a dog waving at Mrs. Hayes. She waved back, a small gesture that seemed automatic. How long were you married? He asked gently, remembering she'd mentioned a husband earlier. 51 years, she said. He passed 2 years ago. Heart attack. Quick, at least. He didn't suffer much. I'm sorry for your loss, thank you. It's strange, you know. You spent half a century with someone and then suddenly you're eating dinner alone, watching television alone, going to bed in a house that feels too big and too quiet. She paused. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You came here to fix a light, not listen to an old woman ramble? It's no trouble at all, ma'am, he said honestly. Sometimes it helps to talk. And besides, I'm not in any rush. My next appointment isn't until 5. She seemed to relax even more at that. He finished connecting the final wire and carefully tucked everything into the electrical box. The new fixture was a simple dome light, nothing fancy, but it was solid and well made. It would last her another 20 years if she needed it to. All right, he said, straightening up. Let me go flip that breaker back on and we'll test this out. He went back through the house, down those creaky basement stairs and flipped the breaker. Back on the porch, he flipped the light switch. The new fixture blazed to life, bright and steady. No flickering. No buzzing. Perfect, he said with satisfaction. Good as new. Actually better than new. Mrs. Hayes stood up and looked at the light, then at him. Something in her expression had completely changed from when he'd first arrived. The suspicion was gone. In its place was something softer, almost maternal. Would you like some lemonade? She asked suddenly. I made it fresh this morning. It's quite hot out here. He hesitated. He had another job to get to, but something told him this was about more than lemonade. This was an olive branch. An apology for the way she'd greeted him at the door. That would be very nice. Thank you. She disappeared into the house, and he used the time to pack up his tools, making sure he hadn't left any debris on her porch. When she returned, she was carrying a tray with 2 glasses of lemonade and a small plate of cookies. I hope you don't mind, she said, setting the tray on the small table between the 2 wicker chairs. I baked these yesterday. Oatmeal raisin. They're not as good as they used to be when my hands were steadier, but they're edible. I'm sure they're delicious, he said, taking a seat in the other chair at her gesture. The lemonade was perfect, tart and sweet at the same time. The cookie was actually excellent, though he suspected she'd made them with more skill than she was giving herself credit for. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Just 2 people on a porch on a summer afternoon. Then Mrs. Hayes cleared her throat. I need to apologize to you, she said, looking directly at him. When you first arrived, I was cold, unfriendly, and I'm ashamed of that. Mrs. Hayes, you don't need to. Please let me finish. She set her glass down carefully. I've lived in this neighborhood for over 40 years. It used to be different. Everyone knew everyone. We had block parties. People didn't lock their doors. But things change. My husband died. My daughter moved to California. She calls once a month if I'm lucky. She's always telling me to be careful, not to trust strangers, to keep my doors locked. And I suppose I've let fear creep in where trust used to be. He listened without interrupting, sensing she needed to get this out. But that's not an excuse, she continued. When you arrived, I saw a young black man I didn't know, and my first instinct was fear. Not because of anything you did. Not because of any rational reason. Just fear based on nothing but prejudice I didn't even know I was carrying. Her voice cracked slightly, and that's shameful. Especially considering my own life, my own history. Everyone has moments of fear, he said gently. You're a woman living alone. It's natural to be cautious with strangers. No, she said firmly. There's a difference between caution and prejudice. I know that difference. I should know that difference better than most people. She paused, seeming to wrestle with something. My husband was black. The words hung in the air. He hadn't expected that, and his surprise must have shown on his face. 51 years ago, we got married in a little church in Virginia, she said, her voice growing stronger. My parents disowned me. His family was skeptical. We had people throw things at us on the street. We couldn't eat at certain restaurants. Couldn't live in certain neighborhoods. When we finally scraped together enough money to buy this house, 3 families on this block tried to start a petition to keep us out. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, she said, but it was also the best. Because I loved him, and he loved me, and we built a good life together despite everything. We proved everyone wrong. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. And yet here I am, decades later letting fear and suspicion cloud my judgment when a kind young man shows up to help me. My husband would be so disappointed in me. Mrs. Hayes, he said quietly, you recognized it. You're acknowledging it. That's what matters. We all carry biases we don't realize we have. The important thing is what we do when we see them. She pulled a tissue from her pocket and dabbed at her eyes. You're very gracious. More gracious than I deserve. My grandmother is a lot like you, he said. Lives alone now. Worries about everything. My mom is always telling her to be careful, not to let strangers in, and I understand that fear. I see it sometimes when I show up for jobs. People clutching their purses a little tighter, watching my hands to make sure I'm not pocketing anything. I used to let it make me angry. What changed? My grandfather, he said. Before he died, he told me something I'll never forget. He said, some people are going to judge you before you even open your mouth. You can't control that. But you can control how you respond. You can let it make you bitter, or you can prove them wrong with kindness. One of those paths leads to peace. The other leads to poison. Mrs. Hayes smiled through her tears. Your grandfather sounds like he was a wise man. He was the best man I ever knew, he said simply. They sat quietly for a few moments, finishing their lemonade. A breeze rustled through the trees, bringing the scent of someone grilling dinner a few houses down. The new porch light glinted in the afternoon sun, solid and secure. Can I ask you something? Mrs. Hayes said. Of course. Do you ever get tired of it? Being patient with people like me? People who should know better? He thought about it for a moment. Sometimes, he admitted. But then I think about all the people who gave me chances. The teachers who believed in me when I was failing math. The boss at my first job who hired me even though I had no experience. My fiancé's parents who welcomed me even though I'm sure they had their doubts. We all need grace sometimes. We all need people to see past our worst moments to what we're trying to become. Mrs. Hayes nodded slowly. Thank you, she said. For the light. For the conversation. For the grace you've shown me today. Thank you for the lemonade, he said, standing up and collecting his tools. And for the cookies. Those were really good. She walked him to his truck, and as he loaded his toolbox into the back, she touched his arm gently. Would you mind if I called your service again? She asked. There's a cabinet in my kitchen that's been sticking, and a leaky faucet in the bathroom. He smiled. I'd be happy to come back. How about next Wednesday afternoon? That would be perfect. As he drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror. Mrs. Hayes was still standing in her driveway, waving. He waved back, and something warm settled in his chest. Sometimes the job wasn't just about fixing lights or cabinets or faucets. Sometimes it was about fixing something deeper, building a bridge where there had been a wall. And that, he thought, was worth more than any paycheck. Wednesday afternoon came around quicker than expected. He pulled up to the house on Willow Creek Drive at exactly 2 o'clock, just as he'd promised. This time there was no curtain fluttering in the window. Instead, Mrs. Hayes was already standing on the porch, a genuine smile on her face. Right on time, she called out as he grabbed his toolbox. I appreciate punctuality. My grandfather's influence again, he said, climbing the porch steps. He used to say that being late was like telling someone their time wasn't valuable. Smart man, she said, holding the door open wide. Come in, come in. The kitchen's this way. The house felt different this time. Walking through it didn't feel like entering a stranger's space. It felt welcoming, lived in. He noticed more details now. The photographs on the mantel, the well-worn Bible on the side table, the throw pillows that had been carefully arranged on the sofa. In the kitchen, she pointed to a cabinet above the sink. That one. It won't close properly. I have to push really hard, and even then sometimes it pops back open. He set down his toolbox and examined the cabinet. The hinges were old and slightly bent, and the door had swollen from years of steam and humidity. Simple fix. He got to work removing the door. Would you like some iced tea? Mrs. Hayes asked. I made a pitcher. That would be great, thank you. She poured 2 glasses and set one on the counter near where he was working. Then she pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down, watching him work just like she had on the porch last week. How did the wedding planning go? She asked. You mentioned you were getting married in the spring. It's going well, he said, using his plane to shave down the swollen edge of the door. Though I'm staying out of most of it. Apparently I have strong opinions about the wrong things. Like what? Like whether we need real flowers or if fake ones are just as good. He laughed. I suggested fake because they last forever. She nearly threw her planning binder at me. Mrs. Hayes chuckled. Oh, you have so much to learn. The flowers matter, trust me. Let her have the flowers she wants. That's what my mom said too. I'm outnumbered. They fell into easy conversation as he worked. She asked about his business, and he told her about some of his more interesting jobs. The time he found a family of raccoons living in someone's attic. The time he accidentally broke through a wall and found a stash of old coins. The elderly couple who insisted on feeding him a full dinner after he fixed their washing machine. People surprise you, he said, rehinging the cabinet door. You never know what you're going to find or who you're going to meet. That's very true, Mrs. Hayes said thoughtfully. You surprise me. How so? When you left last week, I sat on that porch for an hour just thinking. About how wrong I'd been, about how easily fear had crept into my heart, about how much I've let myself become isolated. She paused. I called my daughter that night. Oh yeah? How did that go? Better than usual, she said. I told her about you, about fixing the light, about our conversation. She was quiet for a long time and then she started crying. She said she'd been so worried about me being alone that she'd made me afraid of everything. She didn't realize she was making things worse instead of better. He tested the cabinet door. It closed smoothly now, staying shut with a satisfying click. It's hard when people we love are far away. Everyone's just trying to protect each other. She's coming to visit next month, Mrs. Hayes said, her voice brightening. First time in over a year. She wants to meet you, actually. The nice young man who fixed her mother's light and apparently gave her a wake-up call. I'd be happy to meet her, he said, moving to examine the bathroom faucet she'd mentioned. The bathroom was small but immaculate, decorated in blues and yellows that were probably fashionable 30 years ago. The faucet had a slow drip, the kind that would drive anyone crazy at night. He crawled under the sink to check the connections. You're handsome, you know that? Mrs. Hayes said suddenly from the doorway. He was so surprised he nearly hit his head on the sink pipe. He backed out carefully, looking at her with confusion. Ma'am? She was leaning against the doorframe, her expression soft and distant, almost melancholy. I'm sorry. That was forward of me. It's just that you remind me of someone. Of my husband, actually. When he was young. I'm flattered, he said carefully, not quite sure where this was going. It's the way you move, she continued. The way you work with your hands. So careful, so precise, and your eyes. You have kind eyes. That's the first thing I noticed about James. The kindness in his eyes. She pulled out her phone from her cardigan pocket, her fingers moving slowly over the screen. After a moment, she held it out to him. On the screen was an old photograph, faded and slightly blurry but still clear enough to see. A young couple stood on church steps, the man in a dark suit, the woman in a simple white dress. He was black, tall and lean with a gentle smile. She was white, impossibly young, radiant with joy. This was our wedding day, she said quietly. August 15th, 1971, I was 22. He was 24. He studied the photograph, then looked at Mrs. Hayes. He could see that young woman in her face, in the shape of her smile, in the brightness of her eyes. You both look so happy, he said. We were terrified, she admitted. Absolutely terrified. My parents refused to come. His mother came but sat in the back and cried through the whole ceremony. We had maybe 15 people there total. The preacher rushed through it because he'd gotten threats. Someone had called the church and said they'd burn it down if he married us. She scrolled to another photo. The same couple, a few years older, standing in front of the very house they were in now. This was the day we got the keys to this place, 1982. We'd been married 11 years by then, saving every penny. When we finally found this house, the realtor tried to talk us out of it, said the neighborhood wouldn't be welcoming. But James said he was tired of running, tired of hiding. We bought it anyway. Another photo. The couple with a baby, then a toddler, then a young girl. Our daughter Patricia, Mrs. Hayes said. She's the one coming to visit next month. It was hard for her growing up. She got bullied at school. Other kids said awful things about her parents. About her. She tried to pretend it didn't hurt, but we knew. We always knew. He handed the phone back gently. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. For all of you. Some days I wanted to give up, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Some days I thought maybe everyone was right. Maybe we'd made a terrible mistake. But then I'd look at James, really look at him, and I'd remember why we'd done it. Because love doesn't care about what other people think. Love doesn't bow to prejudice or hatred or fear. She scrolled to one more photo. The couple, much older now, gray-haired and weathered, sitting on the same porch where he'd fixed the light last week. They were holding hands, both smiling at the camera with the kind of contentment that only comes from decades of partnership. "This was our 50th anniversary," she said, 3 years ago. "We renewed our vows right here on this porch. Just us and Patricia and the preacher. Small and simple, just like the first time. James died 4 months later." "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said, wiping at her eyes. "I had 51 years with the finest man who ever lived. How many people can say that? How many people get to experience a love that deep, that true?" She put her phone away and looked at him directly. "When you walked up to my door last week and I saw you standing there, my first instinct was fear. And that fear made me cold, made me suspicious. But then I invited you in, and you sat on my porch and you were kind. You were patient with a foolish old woman, and I saw James in you, not because you look like him, though there's something similar in your face, but because you have that same gentleness, that same grace. Mrs. Hayes, I need you to understand something," she interrupted. "When I said you were handsome, I didn't mean it the way it might have sounded. I meant you're handsome in the way James was handsome, in your character, in the way you move through the world with kindness even when people don't deserve it. That's a rare thing. That's a beautiful thing." He didn't know what to say. His throat felt tight, and he realized he was more moved by her words than he'd expected to be. "Thank you," he finally managed. "That means a lot. More than you know." She smiled through her tears. "Your fiancé is a lucky woman. And someday, when life gets hard, when the world tries to beat you down, I hope you remember that there's an old woman in Virginia who thinks you're one of the good ones." He laughed, and she laughed too, and the heaviness of the moment broke into something lighter. "Now," she said, wiping her eyes one more time, "are you going to fix that faucet, or are we going to stand here crying all afternoon?" "Yes, ma'am," he said with a grin. "Fixing the faucet now." He went back to work and she went back to the kitchen. But something had shifted again. The walls between them had come down completely. She wasn't just a client anymore, and he wasn't just her handyman. They were two people who'd found an unexpected connection, a shared understanding of what it meant to choose kindness in a world that didn't always make it easy. As he tightened the last connection and tested the faucet, watching the water run clean and clear without a single drip, he thought about the photograph of that young couple on the church steps, about all the courage it must have taken to love each other despite everything the world threw at them, about the legacy of that love still rippling out decades later. Touching a stranger on a Wednesday afternoon. "All fixed," he called out to the kitchen. Mrs. Hayes appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Excellent. Now come have some lunch. I made too much chicken salad, and it'll go bad if someone doesn't help me eat it. I really shouldn't. Nonsense. You've been working for 2 hours. You need to eat." He smiled and followed her to the kitchen, where she'd already set out 2 plates and a bowl of chicken salad that looked absolutely delicious. Sometimes, he thought, the best part of the job wasn't fixing things. It was the people you met along the way, the stories they trusted you with, the bridges you built between lives that might otherwise never have touched. And sometimes, if you were really lucky, you got to carry forward the legacy of someone you'd never met, someone who'd lived with grace and courage and taught an old woman that love was always worth fighting. For the chicken salad turned into 2 hours of conversation that neither of them had planned. Mrs. Hayes brought out photo albums, the old-fashioned kind with pictures tucked into plastic sleeves, pages slightly yellowed with age. She walked him through decades of her life, each photograph a window into a world that had changed so much and yet, in some ways, stayed exactly the same. This was James at his first real job, she said, pointing to a picture of a young man in work clothes standing in front of a factory. He worked at the textile mill for 15 years. 12-hour shifts, hard labor, but he never complained. He said he was building something, building a future for us. What did he do after the mill? He asked, genuinely curious. He started his own business, actually. Landscaping and yard work. He'd always loved working with his hands, being outside. People were skeptical at first. They didn't want to hire him. But he did such good work that word spread. Eventually, he had more clients than he could handle. "Sounds like my grandfather," he said. "Started his repair business with nothing but a toolbox and a dream. Built it into something that sustained him for 40 years. Mrs. Hayes nodded knowingly. Men like that, they understand something that a lot of people don't. They understand that honest work done well is its own reward. The money matters, of course. You have to eat, you have to pay bills. But the pride in doing something right, in helping people, in building something with your own two hands, that's worth more than any paycheck. She turned to another page. Here was a photo of James teaching a young girl to ride a bike, Patricia, probably about 7 or 8, grinning with missing front teeth. He was such a good father, Mrs. Hayes said softly, patient, kind. When the kids at school were cruel to her, he'd sit with her for hours talking through it, teaching her not to respond with anger but with dignity. He'd say, "Baby girl, they want you to be small. They want you to shrink down and disappear. But you're going to do the opposite. You're going to stand tall and shine bright, and you're going to show them that hate can't dim your light." That's powerful, he said. Did it help? Sometimes, she admitted. But it was hard, so hard. There were nights when she'd cry herself to sleep. When I'd cry after she fell asleep, wondering if we'd done the right thing bringing a child into this situation. But James never wavered. He said that if we gave up, if we hid or separated or pretended we weren't a family, then they'd win. And he refused to let them win. She closed that album and pulled out another one. This one was different. Newspaper clippings, letters, certificates. James's landscaping business license. An article from the local paper about a community garden he'd started. A letter from the mayor thanking him for his work beautifying the town. He became a pillar of the community, Mrs. Hayes said with pride. The same people who'd tried to keep us out of the neighborhood eventually hired him to maintain their lawns. They trusted him with their homes. Some of them even apologized for how they'd treated us in the beginning. Did you forgive them? She considered the question carefully. James forgave them immediately. That's who he was. Me, it took longer. I carried anger for years, resentment. Every time someone looked at us sideways, every whispered comment, every door that closed in our faces, I held on to all of it. I let it make me bitter. What changed? Patricia, she said simply. When she was a teenager, she came to me one day and said, "Mom, you're always angry. You're always hurt. And I understand why, but it's eating you alive. Dad lets things go, but you hold on to them. Which one of you do you think is happier?" She paused, her fingers resting on an old photograph. That stopped me cold. Because she was right. James was happy. Despite everything, despite all the hardship and prejudice and struggle, he was genuinely happy. He woke up every morning grateful for another day. He loved his work, loved his family, loved his life. And I was bitter, trapped in the past, letting old wounds fester instead of healing. "So you made a choice to let it go?" "I tried," she said. "It wasn't easy. It took years. But I started focusing on what I had instead of what had been taken from me. I had a husband who adored me, a daughter who was strong and beautiful and kind, a home, work, friends, a life that we'd built despite everyone saying it was impossible. That started to matter more than the old hurts." He listened, struck by how much courage that must have taken. Not just the courage to love across racial lines in a time when it could get you killed, but the courage to forgive, to let go, to choose happiness over bitterness. "I think that's why last week affected me so much," Mrs. Hayes continued. "When I realized I'd been cold to you, that I'd let fear and prejudice, even unconscious prejudice, guide my behavior. I saw myself becoming exactly what I'd hated. I saw myself turning into one of those people who'd made our lives so difficult. And that was unbearable. But you recognized it," he said. "That's what matters. And you're here now, sharing all this with me. That takes courage too. Or it's just an old woman rambling to someone kind enough to listen," she said with a small smile. "It's not rambling. It's history. It's important." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw tears welling up in her eyes again. "You really do remind me of him, you know. Not just in appearance or manner, but in spirit. James would have liked you. He would have said, 'That's a young man who understands what matters.' I wish I could have met him." "Me too," she said softly. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the table covered in photographs and memories. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Something I don't talk about much?" "Of course. When I first started this business, I struggled with anger too. Similar to what you described. I'd show up at jobs and people would clutch their purses. They'd count their money in front of me before and after, like they expected me to steal. They'd watch me like a hawk, follow me from room to room. Once, a woman actually asked if I'd mind if she did a background check on me before letting me in her house. That's terrible. It was exhausting, he continued. Every day, feeling like I had to prove I wasn't what they expected me to be. Prove I was trustworthy, competent, safe. I started to hate the work, hate the people. I'd come home and rant to my fiancée about it. She'd listen, but I could see it was wearing on her too. What helped you get past it? My grandfather, actually. In the last few weeks of his life, I told him I was thinking about quitting, going back to office work where I didn't have to deal with people's prejudices every day. And he said something I'll never forget. He paused, remembering that conversation in the hospital room. He said, "Boy, you think hiding from prejudice makes it hurt less? It doesn't, it just makes you smaller. Those people who judge you, they don't matter. What matters is what you do with the opportunities you get. What matters is the person you are when no one's watching. And what matters is the bridges you build with the people willing to see you for who you really are." Mrs. Hayes wiped her eyes. "Wise man, the wisest," he said. "There's always going to be people who judge you wrong. But there's also going to be people like Mrs. Chen who fed you dinner after you fixed her dryer. People like old Mr. Rodriguez who recommended you to everyone he knew. People who see past the surface to the person underneath. Focus on them. Build relationships with them. That's how you change the world, one person, one connection, one act of kindness at a time. And you took his advice. I did. I decided that every job was an opportunity. Not just to fix something, but to show people who I really was. To be so professional, so kind, so excellent at what I do that they'd have to reconsider their assumptions. Some people never did. Some people stayed suspicious no matter what. But others like you came around. And those connections, those relationships, they made everything worthwhile." Mrs. Hayes reached across the table and patted his hand. "Your grandfather would be proud of you. And so would James. You're both living proof that grace and excellence can change hearts. It shouldn't be our job to change hearts," he said gently. "We shouldn't have to be twice as good to be seen as half as worthy. But until the world changes, I'd rather be a bridge than a wall." That's a beautiful way to put it. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily between memories and philosophy, stories and reflections. Mrs. Hayes told him about the community James had built, the friendships that had sustained them through the hardest times. She told him about the preacher who'd married them despite the threats, who'd become a lifelong friend. About the black families in the neighborhood who'd welcomed them with open arms. About the white neighbors who'd gradually warmed to them one by one, until the block that had tried to petition against them became a place where they were loved. It wasn't all struggle, she said. There was so much joy, too. Sunday dinners with friends, block parties, Patricia's graduation, James's surprise 50th birthday party, our anniversary celebrations. The day we paid off this house and burned the mortgage papers in the fireplace. We had a full life. A beautiful life. That's what I want, he said. What you and James had. That kind of partnership. That kind of love that weathers everything and comes out stronger. Then you'll have it, Mrs. Hayes said with certainty, because you understand what it takes. You understand that love isn't just the easy moments. It's choosing each other every day. It's standing together when the world pushes back. It's forgiving each other's